Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. My name is Zachary. I'm the programs coordinator here at the Northeast Harbor Library. And we're able to do free programs like this year-round, thanks to our donors and thanks to our collaborators like the MDI Historical Society. So thank you for that. If you have an eye for history, I'd like to recommend one upcoming program next Wednesday, July 8th. Author, producer, and educator David Felsen will be speaking on his book, New York City Monuments of Black Americans, in which he uses public sculpture as a lens to examine the history of race in America's most populous city. So I encourage you to register for that and all of our upcoming programs on the library website or with me after the event tonight. So now to introduce tonight's presentation, please welcome the Assistant Director of the Mount Desert Island Historical Society, Lisa Taplin-Murray.
Thank you, Zach, and thank you all for coming out tonight. It's a gorgeous night, and I appreciate you choosing to be here with us tonight. Welcome to Say What, MDI Lore and Tall Tales. Again, my name is Lisa Murray. I'm the Assistant Director and the Program Coordinator at the MDI Historical Society. And I'd like to, again, thank the Northeast Harbor Library for collaborating with us again on our summer speaking series. I'll tell you about our next program here, but our next program is on July 8th, next week, and it's called Spy School, and it's a free drop-in kids program at our Soamesville Museum campus, right downtown Soamesville, and it's from 2 to 3 on July 8th. And then our next program here at the Northeast Harbor Library is Otter Creek's Lost Waterfront on August 5th. And it features former Mount Desert Town Manager Derlin Lunt. He's exploring how land acquisitions and the expansion of Acadia National Park systemically isolated Otter Creek from its ancestral shores. So be sure to grab an event flyer. I have them out back over there, or you can sign up for our email list and we'll send you all of our programming and news about twice a month. Beyond our public programs, the MDI Historical Society offers exhibits at the Soamesville Museum and at our Sound Schoolhouse. We publish our annual history journal, Shabako. We care for an archive of over 30,000 items, and we host free online digital history tour of MDI, which I will talk about next. If you enjoyed tonight's program, I encourage you to become members. Our members support this free public programming and everything we do at the Society, so I appreciate it. Some of you may recognize me as the host of our History Happy Hour if you're here during the winter. It's a fun, experiential way to learn about local history, and it runs between October and April. We host tours and trivia and other quiz-style games. As I develop each History Happy Hour, I create a variety of games to keep things interesting. And one of my favorites is Two Lies and a Truth, where I challenge players to find the true story among the two very valid sounding false stories. I love making up false history and contrasting it with the real events, which are just as fascinating and surprising as the false ones. So our speakers tonight are Patrick Calloway and Jen Heindel, and they both work in our collections department, and they also both work at our Soamesville Museum, which is open seasonally. And we often talk about the wild stories that we hear while we're doing research or visitors who come into the museum. I realize that when we are talking about these stories, they're not that far off from some of the fake stories that I make up for History Happy Hour. And we saw the opportunity to have a really fun program. Many of you may have seen Rainy Bench's talk here a couple of weeks ago called What Happened Here, and which was a program about the wild and little known, fantastic known histories of MDI. If you haven't, it's archived on our website, but we're sort of taking that programming and turning it on its head. MDI has no shortage of myths, tall tales, and misremembered history. We're here tonight to uncover the truth behind some of this lore, how these stories started, and in some cases, why they keep being told. Patrick and Jen will take you through many stories tonight, elaborating on 4 meteor myths to start, and then we'll go to a flash round where we'll touch on 10 different stories. Some of what you hear tonight are common misconceptions. Many are drawn from questions that we get at the museum, and others are crowdsourced from local tour guides and locals. If you're an MDI history buff and you catch us getting something wrong, please call it out. And if you're new to the island, by the end of tonight, you'll know things that will make you sound like you've lived here for years. Please feel free to jump in during the program and ask questions on each topic. And Patrick and Jen will answer them as best they can. Oh, here we go. And if the stories tonight you hear surprise you, intrigue you, or entertain you, I really encourage you to try out our free online app, digital history tour app. It's free. It's called MDI History Adventure. What happened here? I have some flyers out back for this with the QR code here. You can access it on the web. You can download an app, and it has 24 stops across every island community. You can visit as many as you want for as long as you want. You can bop all over the island, whichever order that you want. It's really interesting, and it connects you also with historical societies, libraries, and other nonprofits that have more information to dig deeper. And coming soon this summer is a new tour that's just focused on Somesville, which is the original European settlement on Mount Desert Island. Next one. So are any of you familiar with High Seas on Schooner Head Road in Bar Harbor? Okay. This is the estate built by Rudolf Bruneau, I think that's how you pronounce his name, in 1912, and is now the summer dormitory for Jackson Lab students and researchers. There's a lot of stories about this estate, its original owner and its subsequent owners. And I am going to invite Jen Heindel up to explore some of them.
All right, so I'm going to throw a little sort of caveat out there before I start talking. I grew up in New Jersey. I speak very fast. I have been accused of speaking too fast. So if I'm speaking too fast or not loud enough for anyone, please let me know. Just look at me and be like, calm down. Because occasionally when I get really excited when I speak, I do tend to speed up, and I do apologize for that. But the lore of High Seas is probably one of my favorite stories to talk about, because when I was training in my previous life as a tour guide, this was one of my favorite stories to tell. Now, there's a lot of myths surrounding High Seas. The first one is that Rudolf was a German spy. The other one was that he actually built this as a wedding gift to the love of his life. Now, the story, as I've always heard it, was that Rudolf and Edith met while Rudolf was spending a summer over in Europe. Every time he would go to a ball or a party or an event, he would always run into Edith. And after months of hanging out with Edith, he realized that he was smitten with her and could not think of another day without her. So on his last day, before he heads back to the Americas, he professes his undying love to her. And then they make a plan that she would stay in Europe until he had created a house or built a house, which would then be his wedding gift to her. So many months go by. Rudolf hires the famous architect Fred Savage in 1912 to build the famous High Seas, which was then known as Meadowbrook. Now, many months go by. The house is finally finished. He sends a telegram to Edith that says, "Edith, let's get married." So she very excitedly runs down to the ticket office, buys herself a ticket on the next ocean-going vessel to the Americas, which just happens to be, anyone want to take a guess? The Titanic. Now, we all know the story of the Titanic and what happened to her. Now, the story goes that Edith sadly perishes among the sinking of the Titanic. Now, one night, totally heartbroken, he is wandering the halls of High Seas. There's a huge storm raging outside. He looks into the inky darkness from the second floor balcony overlooking the ocean, says to the night, "I'm coming, Edith," and jumps from the second floor balcony, thus ending his life and bringing an end to the tragic love story of Rudolph and Edith. Good news about that story. Not a whole lot of truth to it. Now, there are elements of this story that are true, which is one of the reasons why I love this story so much. Now, Rudolph, for those of you who don't know much about his history, he was a professor. He was born in Ann Arbor, Michigan, back in the early 1900s. He was actually educated in Europe, and he actually spent a lot of time teaching at the University of Heidelberg in Germany, which is probably where it came, the rumor started that he was German and that he was a German spy. Now, his father was German, his mother was an American woman. Now, Rudolph does hire Fred Savage to build the house. This is one of the 300 large stately homes that Fred Savage built throughout his architectural history on the island here. Now, Rudolph has a lot of interesting parts to it, if I can get it. Now, Rudolph was part of the Bar Harbor Village Improvement Society. He was the what's the word I'm looking for? He was the designer of the Precipice Trail. He was the designer of the Beehive Trail. And he was also the designer of the Orange and Black Trail. Now, if anyone's curious about the origins of the name Orange and Black Trail, for those of you who don't know anything about Rudolph here, he was a professor of Semitic philology at the Princeton University in New Jersey. And orange and black is the colors of Princeton University, hence the name of the trail. Now, there's another mystery that kind of actually surrounds Rudolph's death. Luckily, he did not plunge from the second floor balcony. That is truly a myth. Some reported that he actually fell from a trail and passed away that way. The truth is actually much more, shall we say, boring. He sadly passed away in 1917 of pneumonia. Now, one of the reasons why a couple of myths got started is that his first wife, Marguerite, had a brother who sadly had an unfortunate accident on the Cadillac Mountain Trail. Hold on. Pardon my noise. Champlain Mountain. So he actually had an unfortunate accident on Champlain Mountain about a year before Rudolph passes away. Now, the part of the story about Rudolph and Edith and their tragic love story is also partially true. Rudolph did have a friend. She was actually a friend of his first wife. Her name was Edith Evans. Now, Edith sadly was one of the folks who did pass away during the sinking, was not one of the people who passed away during the sinking of the Titanic. She actually survives the Titanic incident, and she is a frequent visitor to Meadowbrook during this time period. One of the other interesting bits of history that surrounds high seas is actually who is owning high seas during World War II. So Eva Van Cortlandt Hawks actually purchases the house about 7 years after Rudolph passes away. And during her time there, she is a widower. She's alone in the house. She's lonely. There are sailors in town. Now, Edith was known to throw parties for the British and American sailors who were training and doing drills in Frenchman's Bay. So on a Friday night, she would hire the famous caterer. His name was Mr. Wolf from Bar Harbor, and he would come out to the house. One of the things that she was well known for is she always served copious amounts of champagne and lobster Newburg. These sailors were not going hungry during their time hanging out with Edith. So Edith spends a lot of time hosting parties at high seas during this time. Now, the rumor about Rudolph haunting high seas to this day, I can neither confirm nor deny. I have never spent a night in high seas. I do not know if it's haunted, and I've never been fortunate enough to meet up with anyone who has actually spent a night in high seas. So I can't confirm or deny. But Rudolph, the rumor about him being a German spy is probably just because of the fact that he was a professor at Heidelberg University for a while, and his father was German by birth. So that's probably where some of these rumors came from. And over the years, people took bits of true history and kind of wove them together to tell you a story about a house that we sadly have very little information on. If you go digging into it, we don't know why Rudolph built the house so large. He was there. He had a couple of children from his previous marriage. So it's possible that he thought he needed that much space. But if you look at the size of the house with the number of people who were living there, it's a little big, even by modern day standards. All right, so let's delve into another popular myth of mine. The lighthouse keepers went insane due to the loneliness they faced out at these lighthouses, and they never got to leave. No one ever came to visit them. These are all myths. Now, the reason that we have this myth that gets perpetuated about people going insane, being out at the lighthouses, is because of popular culture. If you guys remember, there was a movie that came out just a few years ago called The Lighthouse. Was it The Lighthouse or The Lighthouse Keeper? Lighthouse. And there's a awesome scene where the guy's chasing the other guy through the house and he's smashing up things with an axe because he has gone insane. A couple of things you got to know about being out at the lighthouse. First of all, most of these lighthouse keepers, with the exception of a few lighthouses, were not alone. A lot of these were dual lighthouse keeper stations. So you had an assistant lighthouse keeper and a primary lighthouse keeper out there. And if those of you who have been following our Facebook page remember, we did a post on Abby Burgess a number of weeks ago. Now, Abby Burgess was out at Matinicus Rock Lighthouse. That's about as far away from Bar Harbor as you can possibly get. It's about 40 or 50 miles as the crow flies. Now, she was out there with her entire family. A lot of these lighthouse keepers brought their entire families with them, so they were definitely not alone. Now, if you delve a little into the job of a lighthouse keeper, if you look at the 49-page manual printed in 1881 by the United States Lighthouse Establishment, there's two rules that kind of stand out. First one is rule number 16, which reads, keepers must be courteous and polite to all visitors who conform to the regulations and show them everything of interest at the station. So we know that people were coming out to visit. In fact, one lighthouse keeper's wife gets so annoyed by the number of people coming out to the lighthouse to visit that she actually writes this in a letter home to a family member. She complains that over the course of 1 month, there were 22 visitors to the lighthouse who kept tracking dirt into her nice, clean house. So they had regular visitors out of the lighthouses, so they definitely were not going insane due to loneliness. Another rule that you'll find, rule number 6 in the Lighthouse Keeper's Handbook, is that lighthouse keepers may leave the stations to attend divine worship service on Sundays, to procure needful supplies, and to attend important public occasions. So our lighthouse keepers were not stranded on the island. They were not forced to be there all the time. They could leave. In fact, each month, the lighthouse keepers were required to send their lighthouse keepers logbooks to the Lighthouse Keeping Service in Washington, D.C. And they were required to stay in town until they received a letter back that said that their journals had been received and had been logged. So that could take up to 10 days. So for 10 days, you're not on the island. You're partying in town. Your family may be on the island, but you're hanging out in town, gathering supplies, doing what you need to do before you head back out to the lighthouse. So we've got people visiting from the mainland. We've got regular trips to the mainland for supplies. So why does this myth persist that lighthouse keepers were going insane? I have two theories. First one, I cannot 100% confirm. But if you've ever been out to a lighthouse, you're surrounded by ocean water. You can't drink it. So you need a supply of fresh water. And a lot of these lighthouses have cisterns underneath them. And they funneled the rainwater that fell from the sky into the cisterns, and that was their supply of drinking water. Downside to this plan was the rain gutters were made from lead. They were going slightly insane due to lead poisoning over time. The other problem that they faced is an occupational hazard. And that was that the giant Fresnel lenses that spun around in the lighthouses that projected the light and protected the sailors spun in a tray of mercury. You heat mercury, it creates a toxic gas, which will eventually start to wreck your brain. So if you are out there for a long period of time, you are dealing with environmental conditions from the mercury, and you are also dealing with slow lead poisoning. So no one was going insane because of the job that they were faced. I mean, yes, there were probably moments where the job itself, one lighthouse keeper's journal that I read once, basically he complains about the monotony of the job. It's the same thing over and over and over again. If there's no storm, if there's nothing going on, you're basically sitting out there watching the birds fly by, cleaning glass, polishing lenses, polishing brass, and talking to people who drop by. There's not much to do. So yes, the isolation may have driven you a little crazy. The monotony of the job may have driven you crazy, but overall, it's mainly a myth. I will now turn it over to Patrick, who's going to give us an interesting look at the myth that surrounds the Simsville Bridge.
Oh, anybody see that place before? So, reputed to be the most photographed spot in Maine. I'm not sure if that's true or not either, but sure, why not? So the myth is that this has been built here since the 1780s. So people could cross the creek from the Selectmen's Building to the land on the other side. So anybody ever hear that one? No. So what is the truth? Well, there was probably a bridge there back in the 1700s. However, this arched style that you see here does not actually come around until the 1980s and the suggestion of a COA student. The original bridge was probably a flat bridge that you would have seen across closer to the surface of the water. So there was probably a bridge, but it didn't look anything like this. So the origins of that bridge or that design is from the early 1980s. The Historical Society was run out of the Selectmen's Building, so that little white building that you're familiar with. And we needed collection storage, still do for that matter. But the building on the other side was where we would store some of our things. So we needed a way to get across the creek without having to walk all the way around. So everybody agreed it'd be a great idea. The bridge was designed by Rock Caviano, the engineer Harris Hyman, and Barbara Sossaman, and built off-site. So it was not actually even built here. So the 81 bridge was not built here. So the arched form was specifically inspired by the bridge in Monet's garden. So if it looks familiar from there. Virginia Soames Sanderson, who lived across the street, donated money for the bridge and named it after her grandfather, Thaddeus Shepley Soames. So if you've been to the bridge, you'll see that memorial stone there at the beginning of it. That is not his grave either. That's a sort of a subsidiary myth, is that they buried him there. No, he's buried up at Brookside. That's his memorial. Unfortunately, the 1981-82 bridge started to rot out, so they bring in another bridge. So 1995, you can see that Amazon delivered somewhat more slowly back then. There was some concern about how safe that bridge would be. So that gives me a chance to pull out my absolute favorite thing in our whole collection. We have 30,000 some odd items, and I don't even want to know how many pages of documents. This is my absolute favorite thing in the whole building. So it is a 2003 email from Harris Hyman, our designer, and there was a concern over whether the bridge was safe. So he sends an email back, and anything this eloquent needs to be read out loud. So When we presented the design to the committee, one older member suggested that the youth of MDI would be using the bridge for practicing marriage activities. He actually phrased it somewhat more crudely, not necessarily necessary to repeat here. Larger bridges must be analyzed for dynamic response under a moving load, but this is usually not done for small pedestrian bridges. Nonetheless, we were curious as to what would happen under the service conditions suggested by the gentleman on the committee. We spent the next morning discussing the subject and speculating about dynamic loading. Actually, I realized that a more severe service condition would occur when half a dozen of the larger local boys might finish a couple of cases and would visit the bridge to bounce up and down. I estimated their load cycle at 0.5 to 1.5 hertz cycles per second and gave them 200 pounds apiece. The dynamic response of the bridge under these conditions was about 7 or 8 hertz, which would filter out any imposed slower loading, so I figured it was pretty safe. Sometime around 1995, the bridge suffered from dry rot and was reconstructed out of pressure-treated southern white pine, which is much stiffer and stronger than the original spruce. So now the bridge is even stronger, maybe 30%, and the dynamic response is over 10 hertz. Consequently, you can advise the bridal party that the bridge is quite safe for a wedding, and while I would hardly counsel it, it is also safe for the consummation of the marriage. However, I have been away from MDI for too long, and I have not kept up with local tradition. So, yeah, the bridge is safe. Would not encourage those activities, but you can settle that up with the Bar Harbor cops. So why does the myth of this bridge being there since the 1760s persist? A part of it, in my interpretation, is location. If you think about the geography there, that would be the place where a bridge would have been built back in that time. So it is not completely outside the scope of possibility that there was a bridge. It makes sense for it to be there. The other reason is that this is just too good of a story not to tell gullible tourists. Not that I would ever do such an underhanded thing, of course. Lighting was a little better, I'd get a halo, but that might be pushing it. This is one of those legends that the story is, I don't think, quite as interesting as the truth. But if we think about tourism, if we think about things that draw people to a place, if it is or isn't the most photographed spot in the whole state, well, we brought it in on a truck in 1995, doesn't have the romance of it's been built here for 250 years. So that is a story that, perhaps the story in some ways is more useful than the truth as a way of attracting people to the spot. All right, let's head on to the next one. Yeah, the Jesuits. So the lore is that is a Jesuit weapon. And the story is 1921, Christopher Lawler unearthed a mysterious dagger while planting a tree in Southwest Harbor's Norwood Cove. Because the find had been located only a quarter mile from the Jesuit Meadows at Fernald Point, which has its own problems, the local community long maintained that it was a 400-year-old weapon belonging to the 1613 Jesuit mission of St. Sauveur. The object was described in a 1946 Bar Harbor Times article as a bronze weapon with copper inlays bearing marks of ancient workmanship. So anybody ever hear that story or that artifact? There's a couple.
That was a Jesuit field?
Yep, it was pulled out from there.
I've heard about that for years. Sorry.
Yeah, so this is a story in circulation. Anybody want to take a guess at how true it is? Yeah, about 0%. I'll have to rephrase that, 1%. It is of actual French materials. Had nothing to do with the 17th century, though. So after extensive research and expert consultation with military museums,
That artifact was made out of the remains of a 75 millimeter artillery shell from World War I. The copper inlays are actually fragments of the shell's copper driving belt. So if you see the serrations there and like that, that was actually the mechanism that would make the shell spin in the gun. So World War I origins. Further, the object shows no sign of corrosion that would be expected of iron buried in Maine soil. It is believed that Lawler planted the object for his own amusement, as he had served in France during World War I and had easy access to trench art. So what they would do in the trenches, because they had some time on their hands, was that they would take scrap metals and things like that and shape them into trench art. So, little figurines, little statues, chess sets, things like that. Somebody decided to make a dagger out of a shell casing. The story took root because the object was displayed behind glass at the library for over 70 years, often with the suitably ambiguous caption that encouraged viewers to believe its French colonial origins. So, why does that story keep on? Well, that was the story that was being told as truth. All right, so I'll turn it over to Jen.
We're going to get into our flash round where we are going to dispel a whole bunch of really fun myths really quickly. All right, so the first one is lobster has always been high society food. Not a chance. So how many of you have ever heard that lobster has always been high society food? One person. How many of you heard that it was cheap food that we fed to the poor? Yep. So back in the 1800s, back when we were first starting to harvest lobsters, they were dirt cheap. Guys used to literally put them in a wheelbarrow, reel them through town, and sell them for 5 cents per lobster. Now, one of the reasons that this myth persists is because, well, let's just say lobster in modern day times is a little on the expensive side. Even knowing most people think that closer to the source, i.e. the waters all around this island, the cheaper it should be. Not the case in most times. So lobster was not always high society food. In fact, it didn't actually start to gain popularity among the upper echelons of society until around 1842, when 2 guys up in Eastport, Maine, decided to open a canning factory, which did not go well. For those of you who don't know the story about the canning factory, these guys were not good at what they did. Cans were not properly sealed. Shall we just say they exploded in quite dramatic fashion. So they did, of course, the only thing they could think of. They went over to Scotland. They kidnapped a guy who worked at a Scottish canning factory, dragged him back to the United States, held him hostage until he helped them set up their canning factory up in Eastport. Poor guy. Actually, as far as I understood it, he was here for quite a while. And as soon as their canning factory got up and running, things stopped exploding. They started selling 1 pound cans of lobster meat, and they shipped it all across the country. It was a cheap source of protein. So, someone got a can of it down in New York City, as the story that I have read goes. Chef at the Waldorf Astoria looked at it and thought, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know what it is. I have never tasted it. He started asking around to the folks who worked in the kitchen. No one else had ever eaten it either. So they started experimenting. And as the story goes, lobster Newburgh was created. Was put on the menu at the Waldorf Astoria that evening. People absolutely loved it. And let's just say that was the tipping point from when it became less low-class food and a little bit more high society food. So if it hadn't been for 2 guys setting up a canning factory, lobster might still be cheap to this day. So if we need to go back in time after we build our time machine, those are the 2 guys I'm knocking off first. Patrick's going to give us a quick flashback before I come back.
Okay, so if you're going to cook lobster, what do you need? Fire. That's got a little out of hand. So the myth is that all of the building in Bar Harbor is new because the whole town burned down in the fire of 47. Many of the out-of-state newspapers declared the town a total loss. So you see images like this. Yeah, that looks like a total loss. So there's a reason why that starts to circulate. The truth, 67 homes on Millionaires Row, where the shore path is now, burned to the ground. 170 private homes, 5 large hotels, and about a quarter of the acreage on the whole island burned. So many millionaires lost their money in the Great Depression and could not afford to rebuild. So there are many old foundations, which you can still see if you go through Bar Harbor. There are a number of large homes and buildings that date before the fire. So the Criterion, La Rochelle, so where Bar Harbor Historical is now. The turrets at COA, so their admin building. They escaped the fire, even though the nearby chauffeur's cottage was burned. So if you stand on the COA campus, Route 3, you can see the old foundation of the Blue Side inside, where all the buildings are old.
This one you said, where all the, what? The last sentence you said.
Nope, where all the buildings are old.
Thank you.
How many people have heard the myth that back in the early days of tourism here on Mount Desert Island, people were escaping the cities, heading to Mount Desert Island because it was quiet, peaceful, and tranquil? Say what?
It was cool.
So for the most part, cars weren't allowed on MDI until around 1913. It was a little bit more quiet than the noisy cities that a lot of our socialites were coming from, places like Boston, New York City, and Philadelphia. However, here's the thing. If you were unfortunate visitors to Bar Harbor in around 1904, you may have been, shall we say, kept awake for quite some time due to a noisy foghorn being placed on Egg Rock Island lighthouse. Now, in 1904, they installed a compressed air foghorn at Egg Rock Island and pointed it at the town of Bar Harbor. Now, for those of you who have never spent a lot of time near a foghorn, I will attest to the fact that longhorns sound louder the denser the fog gets. So the very first time this foghorn ever went off, it went off for 30 days straight in a dense fog. It was pointed at the town of Bar Harbor. Now, there's a gentleman who I'm sure you are all familiar with. His name was Joseph Pulitzer. Anyone ever heard of him? Yeah, his summer home sat about 4 miles from the infernal foghorn, shall we say. And during the time that he was actually constructing his summer home and remodeling, he created what his servants and as well as his family members jokingly called the Tower of Silence. He had a medical condition, which I'm not exactly sure what was, but it made him hypersensitive to sound. So he had 2 sets of windows hung back to back, pretty much the first double hung windows to help drown out noise. He had the floor of the room that he slept in on ball bearings. That way there'd be no squeaky floor joists. And the story goes that the only sound that he could not drown out was the infernal foghorn 4 miles away. So until the residents of Bar Harbor got together and started sending copious amounts of hate mail to the office of the lighthouse keepers in Washington, D.C., who then looked at the letters and thought, there's no way it's keeping everyone up at night. They actually sent a gentleman up to the island to do a sound study. He took various sound readings throughout Bar Harbor over the course of about 2 weeks. Then after that, he disappeared, went back to his office, wrote his report up, and basically concluded, yeah, it's really loud. So once they figured out that, yes, it was loud, yes, it was pointed in the wrong direction, yes, it was keeping the residents of Mount Desert Island up, or especially those in the Bar Harbor region closest to the foghorn, they went out and managed to turn the foghorn. So now it points due south. And the other great thing about the Egg Rock Island foghorn that most people are slightly unaware of is it does not turn on using fog anymore. So the original foghorn would have been triggered by the amount of humidity in the air. The modern day foghorn out at Egg Rock Island is only turned on using marine band radios. You turn your marine band radio to the correct channel, key the microphone 5 times, it will turn on the foghorn. We get a lot of fog here in Frenchman's Bay, so they thought it was sort of unnecessary to have it running 24/7 because of the fact that it will cause the foghorn to wear out much faster. Now, there's another gentleman other than just Joseph Pulitzer who really took his naps on this island seriously during the summer. And his name was William Henry Pearson. Now, this gentleman was probably one of the largest employers on MDI back between the 1920s and 1930s. He actually raised champion horses here on the island. Now, the story goes that every day at 1 o'clock after lunch, he would ascend the stairs to his bedroom where he would take a nap. Now, the minute he started climbing the stairs, his servant would go out into the backyard. There was a large bell out there. He would ring the bell. That would tell all the workers on the entire estate, put down your tools, stop what you're doing, rest, because he did not want to be disturbed during his nap. Now, as soon as this nap was over and he started to descend the stairs again, his servant would go back out, ring the bell again, and that would tell all the servants that they could continue their work. So every day this went on. So, well, yes, there were periods of nice tranquility here on the island. There were spots that were very quiet. Wasn't always the case in certain spots, especially if you were here during the first installation of the foghorn in 1904. All right, what's another myth we can bust? How many people know that there's pirate treasure buried on this island? How many people want to go with me to find it? Great, let's go. All right, so we're mounting up a expedition after this story, after this talk gets over later on tonight. So the myth that there is pirate treasure on this island actually goes back to 1882, when an article appears in the Mount Desert Herald. Now, the story in the Herald says, that's the word I'm looking for. What is the word I'm looking for? I've lost my train of thought. All right. So in this newspaper article, there are two men who are supposedly told where this pirate's treasure is. One is a man by the name of Captain Henry, who attends a seance. And during the course of this seance, the pirates come to the seance leader. What would you call the person who leads the seance? Medium, sorry. So it comes to the medium. They tell Captain Henry to go look at this particular spot and that he would find the buried treasure. He doesn't find it, by the way. There's another gentleman by the name of Tobias Vernell, who supposedly in a dream one night had this vision of a field and the corner of the field where the pirate's treasure was buried. So the next morning he gathers a group of people together, they go digging and they find absolutely nothing. Now, this story keeps getting perpetuated that there is hidden pirate treasure on this island, because the last person who actually talked about this hidden pirate treasure was my favorite, one of my favorite people on MDI, LaRue Spiker, who in 1964 wrote another article in the newspaper about buried pirates' treasure on the island. So in her article, she says that there was a ship that was being chased up from Boston, sailed into Somme Sound. The ship was scuttled. The crew of the ship jumped off the ship, swam into a cave that's opening sits 5 feet below the high tide mark, and they hid out in the cave until the coast was clear. She does not give you any further information as to, first of all, did they go diving later on in order to resurrect the treasure? Is it still sitting at the bottom of Somme Sound? I mean, Somme Sound's kind of deep, and did they have the equipment to be able to dive for it is the question. So because of the fact that she never gives us enough information to tell whether or not the pirate's treasure was found, this myth continues to this day here on the MDI that there is pirate's treasure out there. So all I can say is if any of us want to go treasure hunting, I'm down for it. I will not go scuba diving in Somme Sound because it terrifies me, but I'm up for a good challenge. All right, next myth I will bust is about the schooner Tay, everyone's favorite shipwreck in 1911. Now, the myth is that the schooner Tay was looted by the townsfolk of Bar Harbor, and the ship is still underneath the sand out at Sand Beach. How many of you people have seen the wreck of the schooner Tay? I did once in the mid-1970s, I think. there's a picture of me standing next to the wreckage. Now, the
Yeah. Yes.
history of the schooner Tay is she was a 125-ton, two-masted wooden schooner that ran aground off of Sand Beach. And the crew was actually saved by Ellen Morgan Satterley, who actually owned what we now consider Sand Beach back in the day. She and her family actually housed the sailors overnight and basically keep them safe and warm in their summer home. And the Satterleys kind of pillaged some of the wood from the schooner Tay. The schooner Tay, when she ran aground, was carrying lumber. She was also carrying a supply of shingles on her deck. So the Satterleys actually built a wooden boathouse from wood that was on the schooner Tay. A lot of folks actually went out to the wreckage, scavenged as much wood as they could, and I'm sure if you had looked in homes back in the early part of the 1900s, you would have found different bits of wreckage from in there. I'm also willing to bet that a number of the residents of the town of Bar Harbor actually went out and scavenged some of the shingles. Reports that I read said that all the shingles washed out to sea. Well, shingles float, the tide goes in and out. I'm willing to bet that some of them actually ended up washing up on the beach. So over the years, the schooner Tay has actually been unearthed after the storm had gone through. The wreckage was still left on the beach. The skeleton of the ship, a lot of the boards had been taken off for building materials. The skeleton of the ship was actually buried underneath the shifting sands. And over the years, in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and even in the 90s, the ship was revealed from time to time due to storms that went through the area. The most recent time, as we all know, was in January 10th of 2024, when the big storm actually uncovered the schooner Tay. And part of her washed out to sea. So the schooner Tay took sail during the storm. Luckily, there is a tag on the schooner Tay that was put there by Acadia National Park, so that should any of the wreckage wash up, you can actually go to this website, log it, and we can follow the continuing journey of the schooner Tay. So yes, the myth is true. It was scavenged by the local residents, and it was for a time buried underneath the beach out at Sand Beach. All right, Patrick.
All right, so the next one up, John G. Rockefeller Jr. created Acadia National Park by donating all the land. So if any of you heard that one? Okay. So the myth is that he donated all the land. The reality is a little bit more mixed. So what we call the national park now was created through private land donation by the Hancock County Trustees of Public Reservations. The purpose of the group was to acquire land and holdings in Hancock County for public use. The tax-exempt status of this group was challenged in court, and this is what drives George B. Dorr to seek a national park status for it. So, date important, we're sitting, mid-1916 or so. So, it's that time of the calendar. So, 5,000 acres of land were donated to the American people in 1916 to create Lafayette National Park. A subsequent rule change was that national parks could not be named after individuals, even if they were as well liked as the Marquis de Lafayette. So in 1929, it is renamed Acadia National Park. In 1930, John D. Rockefeller Jr. would start donating his private lands to the park. So the park exists, and then he starts to donate some parcels to the park. He was instrumental in creating the carriage roads, however, which started as an extension of the carriage roads he had created across his own lands. There was opposition to his plans to create the carriage roads from many, and later motor roads from many islanders were worried that they would cause congestion and mar the beauty of the park. So is the carriage road a solution to a problem or the problem for motorists? Drive up and down Highway 3, you'll get mixed answers depending on what time of day it is. How about the next one? It's nice 10-inch smoothbore Rodmans if you're out, gun shopping. So the myth is that the two cannon near the town dock are from an old fort in Bar Harbor. And the question is, when did this myth start and why does it keep going? So this is one of those stories that has a certain degree of logic to it. So much like our bridge, it makes sense that there would be a bridge there. So of course there's a story about it. The story here is that, well, where else do you put very large, heavy artillery pieces other than a fort? Because this isn't something that you're going to leave just laying around for the scenery. These things are very expensive, very heavy, very hard to move. So if they're here, where's the fort? So the truth behind it is that there were some fortifications in the area during the Spanish-American War. So we're getting 1898, and the United States declares war with Spain, and there's panic up and down the coast over the potential for Spanish naval fleets to come up and down the coast, which were largely unfortified. So what do? Well, you go to Civil War surplus. 10-inch Rodmans were coastal defense weaponry from back in that era. If you head to Fort Knox, the cannon and that very distinctive soda bottle shape looks pretty familiar. They start pulling those out of storage and start to emplace them on pretty much any threatened spot that could be attacked. So there's a battery that's put in on Egg Rock. It was a temporary emplacement of 3 of these 10-inch cannon. There's 2 of them in the park now. They were sporadically maintained. In 1991, the Coast Guard and the Connecticut National Guard used a helicopter to move these guns into the park where they are today. No account of them ever being used or fired, but they look cool. How about witchcraft? Not one of my relations, for once. So the myth, Sally Summers was a witch. So this is a myth and a legend from over by Southwest. So taking a look at this woman and allegations of witchcraft. So all of you are familiar with Salem and the witch trials and all of that 1690s routine, which pretty much destabilized the Massachusetts government there for a while. Subsequently rehabilitated as a play by Arthur Miller in the 1950s. The question is, does the witchcraft stories and legends have any basis in truth in this part of the country and at a later date? So looking at the early 1800s. So anybody hear this story?
There's a book about it.
Yeah, there's a recent publication about it. Yeah, I forgot the name of it as well, but I know what you're talking about. So what do you think? Do we have witches, or did we have witches here on MDI?
Sure.
No. Why not? So what is the truth behind the story? So Sally Summers was an actual person. She was born in 1792 near Norwood Cove. The allegation was that her mother was a witch before her. So a bloodline of witchcraft going back who knows how far, who cast spells on the community to guarantee safe passage for ships. She allegedly cast a spell on a man to marry her, and he walked around the rest of his life in an enchanted zombie-like daze. So fans of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I'm seeing some tropes here. He tried to escape by booking passage on his ship bound for Europe, but disappeared before it set sail. Sally was accused, but never arrested due to lack of evidence. It was said that she sacrificed 2 black dogs on the top of Flying Mountain, called Dog Mountain then. I don't know, it sounds like evidence to me. Then sent her spirit into them to terrify locals. She also took the form of a black cat to spy on people to see if they were gossiping about her. She dies when a neighbor shot the black cat with a silver bullet, and she passes away days later. In 1932, the apples that grow on a tree near her house allegedly cause illness, accidents, and even death to anybody who eats one. So there's the story. Now, let's assume that we buy the idea that witchcraft exists and that there are people with supernatural powers who are poisoning apples for us to stumble in on. So let's forget what we know from Disney. No, let's count this as truth. She was an actual person. She was economically and socially marginalized. So she comes from a family that was not part of the wealthy society, was not part of sort of the cultural life of early Southwest Harbor, you might say. She is single. So you have a single woman on the edges of society. If we think classically where witchcraft tales come from, whether we're talking about in Europe in the Middle Ages, whether we're talking about Salem and that whole thing, that is the demographic that usually gets pointed to as a witch or someone who is in league with the devil. When times are not so great, there is that urge to look around for scapegoats. So if you're looking for a scapegoat, who better to fit the role than a economically marginalized, socially marginalized, single woman without a whole lot of economic or social connections to everybody else? She is the perfect scapegoat. Subsequent ideas have taken that legend that builds around her name as fact. There is, of course, no evidence that there was a cat shot with a silver bullet. I have no idea where you'd get a silver bullet. Apparently, the grocery store was much more diverse in their offerings back then. There's no evidence of an apple tree that gives poisoned apples. There's no evidence of any dogs being sacrificed. But these are stories that are placed on her name as part of the legend. Let's do something a little bit more perky. Here we are. How about a church mission? So the myth is for over 150 years, Fernald Point in Southwest was identified as the site of the St. Sauveur Mission. Founded in 1613 by French Jesuits with the dual purpose of converting the Wabanaki and extending French colonial claims along the Maine coast. The fledgling settlement, which built no fortifications, was attacked and destroyed by the English captain Samuel Argyle just 2 months after its finding. So anybody hear that one?
Yeah, I tell that one.
Yep, so French mission post out there. Okay, so there are certain elements of truth to this. The Jesuits were very active in this part of the country. There were French colonial claims up and down the coast. If we take a look at the journals of Samuel de Champlain, for example, MDI is one of two places on the coast that we can point to directly and know that he was there. So there is some connection that we can make to actual history on why the story would continue on. So what's the truth? The story traces back to 1858. So some 250 years after the alleged fort was created, where letters and memoirs written by the French Jesuit missionaries were published. So the Jesuit relations, if you're in for some reading, there are 73 volumes, starting early 1600s all the way through the 1790s. Fascinating reading. Highly recommend, but consider your source on that. Including the stories of Father Bayard, who was described in detail in the location of the St. Sauveur Mission. So Bangor attorney Elijah Hamlin read these newly available accounts, so we're back in the 1850s, and interpreted the described location as Fernald Point, an idea then adopted by Francis Parkman. So for fans of history, Francis Parkman is one of the first real big name American historians. So 1850s, 1860s, he has a particular interest in colonial history. and he is very influential. So his popular influence starts to spread this claim widely. And once it was established as the site, the supporting evidence starts to appear. So notably a map drawn by a Jesuit father who visited in 1860 and recorded what he identified as the remains of a fortification and the marked grave of one of the fathers. However, this evidence is not persuasive. A photograph taken from atop Flying Mountain in the 1850s reveals what was supposed to be a fortification was actually a barn foundation. There's no archaeological evidence to confirm that there was a mission on that point. The historical record confirms that the French built no fortifications at the mission, which, going back to early 1700 standards, that would have been a grave breach of what the Jesuits considered to be their mission as education. They were not there as, people who were going around building forts. It really made no sense. So, Bayard's own writings state the mission was apart from Mount Desert Island, which suggests a mainland location like Lemoyne is actually more probable. So the whole case for Fernald Point rests on a chain of interpretation that had the story and then backfilled in the evidence. So you want the Algerine, or would you like me to do it? Okay, cool. So that's the Algerine. Anybody know where that is?
Sorry, quick question, going back to the fort. I got the idea there is no fort, or there was no fort. Were there Jesuits? I didn't quite get whether the Jesuits were there or not.
Okay, so question for the folks online. Were there Jesuits at what we would call the Saints of War mission? So yes, there were Jesuit fathers that were here in 1613. So if we take a look at the Jesuits' relations, we do have letters by them, and we do have their records of being in this area. The part that is not true is that there was no mission station where it was alleged to have been. Right. Yes, so they were here. Any other questions? Feel free to stop me now. Okay, so the Algerine. Anybody ever see this before? So the Algerine or Algerian coast stretched from Reed Point to Dodge Point in Tremont village of Seal Cove on the west side of MDI. There is no definitive explanation for why this name is put on that landscape. There's a couple of different theories. So Tremont Historical, wonderful organization. Stop by the museum. It should be opening 4th of July, somewhere around there. Shameless plug. So it's a plausible explanation that a ship named the Algerian was wrecked on this coast, but no records exist showing a ship by that name going down near MDI. However, other ships sailing in Maine did have that name. So a wreck on the north shore of the eastern end of Seal Cove was studied in 2011 by the Park Service and the Institute for Maritime History. So it's a heavily built wooden sailing vessel, likely a schooner, estimated at 70 to 85 feet in length and probably about 75 to 125 tons. It appears to have been built sometime to mid to late 19th century and was likely used in the coastal trade, hauling cargo like lumber, brick, and coal up and down the seacoast. So the researchers believe that it could be the schooner Clara B. Kennard, built in 1886, but they're not sure because no formal ID could be made. Part two. So this is story number 2. If you remember the old movie Clue. So imagine I'm Tim Curry. I wish. So, or this could have happened. As mentioned earlier, pirates and pirate treasure have long been a part of the island's lore. Algerian pirates and privateers intermittently preyed on American ships, extracting annual tribute from the U.S. since 1795, and probably a little earlier. And rumors persist that they hid their buried treasures along Seal Cove. So that could happen. Or consider this. According to Henry Robb's Place Names of MDI, the nickname may have come because it resembled the coast of Algiers, which I've never sailed off Algiers. I have no idea. And to describe something as Algerian was to describe a place of piracy or one who acts like a ruffian. It is also a popular name for porpoises or dolphins. So there's the three that we've heard of. And this is a little bit of a unique type of story in that we don't know what the truth is. We actually do not have an answer for this one. So this is where we start to crowdsource. Have you heard of any other stories, or does anybody actually know why it's called the Algerine?
I have a question just for historic people in the room. Has it ever appeared on a map? Have you ever seen it on a map? I know it's sort of a local name for that stretch of coast, but I've never seen it on a map.
Okay, so for the folks online, the question was, has the Algerine or Algerian ever been on the map? Not that I am aware of. My go-to source for all things geographic on the island is the Robb book, so the place names. He seems a little speculative about it as well. So that would be my best guess on what he would know. And I would certainly defer to him.
I will also say that I've heard from Tremont locals. I asked the meeting why it's called the Algerine. And they say, I don't know, there was something about a ship from Algeria had hauled up there to do repairs, and the whole crew lived there for a month while they were fixing up the ship. And so everybody called it the Algerian coast. But that's just a guy. I don't know.
Yeah.
Story.
So for the folks online, another potential explanation. The source is a guy. Is that at one point in time, there was a vessel from Algiers that laid up there for repairs at one point in time. So the locals started to call it the Algerian or Algiers area. When your source is a guy, no, not disputing a guy, whoever he is, but the evidence is not quite there yet. So anybody hear anything else? Because I kind of like the answer to this one. No takers. All right.
Does anybody have any questions, or anybody want to share any stories they heard, or ask Patrick and Jen the truth behind them?
Yeah, go for it.
So, I actually didn't talk to the partner historian since, when I first was a child, came here, they talked about the ship's harbor down at the south end near Wonderland, beyond Wonderland, as being the site of a ship that sailed in on a storm night time in Calloway, could not get back out. People started to and looked at actually on the park tour, and so we heard it several times. And then also said that actually never did happen. And some people think it's a crossover of the story. It was that song, long legs of current, like 5. But no ship. Certainly, if you were to there, you could certainly picture a ship coming in the south in a storm line.
Right. So
It's a story, but I heard the current going on.
So from the audience here in person, so there's a legend of a ship that is coming in to harbor at high tide, was unable to get back out, and the people starved to death there. So is that true or false? If it's the case that I'm thinking of, this is the Grand Design story. So the Grand Design was a vessel that did actually exist back in the mid 1700s. It was carrying immigrants to the coast of Maine. It did run aground However, it did not run aground here locally. It ran aground further south on the coast. So that's the Grand Designs become a story that is associated with near island waters. Right ship, right story on a lot of folks not making it out of that, but wrong spot.
First of all, if you're ever trying to get into Ship Harbor, it's not very easy by boat. The other story is the boat went into Ship Harbor, waited there at low tide so it could hide, not be seen from the enemy out there, just by getting in and waiting till the mass sort of settled down. Have you heard that one too?
So another version of the story is that there was a ship coming into Ship's Harbor. It was trying to hide, so it waited for low tide so the vessel could hide more easily. I haven't heard that one. It would make a great deal of sense, but I have not heard that story.
Growing up, you heard it.
Yep. So from the rest of the crowd, for the folks online, it seems like that's a story that is in circulation. Cool. That's why we do this. So we learn things too. Yes.
We have a contribution from online about the Algerine coast. Catherine says, during my wild youth, it was a party spot. The lake is called the Algerine coast.
Yeah, we'll censor the name out of that one because I think we might know who that is. There's allegations that people may have been partying there. The good news is that we have a bridge where you can also do that in safety.
Very good.
So I think the book, the witch story that you told, I think the book is called Dog Witch Mountain.
Yeah.
And it's written by Winter Fox, which is a pseudonym for someone else on the island, but that's the book. And I got it at the Soamesville Library, and it's a very quick, easy read.
Yep. So it was called Dog Witch Mountain.
Dog Mountain. Is it Dog? I told it.
Okay.
Sense, but yeah.
All right. So
That's his.
Yeah, right, that's his pseudonym.
yeah. So for the folks online, the book that just came out about Sally Summers and that case, it's Dog Witch Mountain
Dog Mountain Witch.
or Dog Mountain Witch. Yep.
In the archives downstairs for Northeast Harbor, there's the whole history of the Summers family. And they actually were very well-to-do, well-respected. Dad, though, was a mulatto.
Yep.
And that's where some of the kind of hard feelings came about. Sally was their daughter. They also had a son. They owned about 100 acres. So they actually owned up to Dog Mountain. They raised sheep. The neighbor, Connors, was, there was just antagonism between them because he had dogs and these dogs would chase the sheep. So there was a lot of bad feelings about these dogs chasing the sheep. And he went out, the neighbor did, and shot her cat. And she just out of spite.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very upsetting. So Mom and Dad did very well. And she did not marry, but her brother did. And there are descendants still here. Anyway, that just kind of fills it in. Mom wasn't a witch. And Sally wasn't a witch, but physically as a mulatto, she might have seemed different looking. And so the other thing that Mom would do is, in order to get, I think just for alcohol, actually, she would say she was going to expel on the boat if they were coming in and out of some sound, unless they would give them some alcohol. So I think she did get a reputation as an alcoholic for, trying to figure out a way of getting tribute from passing boats.
I see all types of applicabilities for that story. So for the folks online,
I actually picked up, she was close enough.
oh, cool.
Thank you, Doug.
So the hockey puck works.
Yes.
Any other questions for myself or for Jen?
Were there more questions?
I guess I have
Yes.
one, and I don't know if it's the same house, but the Bruno house. And I was on like a cruise, like whatever sunset cruise, and like they went, they saw it from the boat, and the guy in the boat said that there was connections to Dark Shadows, the TV show in the 60s. And that there was it was either that I was inspired by, because the Dark Shadows house actually is on the coast of Maine somewhere, like that opens up at the woman taking a train to Maine. So I was just wondering, it seemed weird to me because it doesn't look like the house in the TV show. And I know that it was filmed in like New York City in a studio. So, but I just wondered, like so when I saw that picture, I was like, oh, maybe like Dark Shadows will come up, but I didn't, has anybody heard that connection?
Don't know anything about Dark Shadow, but Bruno's wife, an American, and her family were from Lenox, Massachusetts. They went over to Germany. He was a professor doing a stint over there. She did pass away. They did have 5 children, so it was quite a lot of kids. He brought them back so that his in-laws could help with the kids. He built a summer home because that's what all well-to-do families were doing at the time. So,
At Dark Shadows, it was like a superstitious, like vampires, witches.
Yep. So for the folks online, the conversation is going back to our haunted house that we started with, and whether or not there's a possible connection between it and the TV series Dark Shadows. I can't speak to Dark Shadows. I was negative many years old when that came out. Well, I'm a historian. I can count backwards too. So I have not actually seen it, so I do not know. I can ask my mom.
It's not Prime.
Oh, okay, it's on Prime.
The whole series. All years.
Oh, so, okay, so if you're looking for something to watch while it's, you must be getting degrees around here in the next couple of days, Dark Shadows is on Prime. Yeah.
So the gentleman who built High Seas, was he what from a wealthy family? Because I can't imagine that a professor could afford to build that big of a house.
All right, so the question was the professor from High Seas wealthy? Because professoring does not pay very well. That's a true story. So the question is, where did the money come from?
That honestly, I do not know.
His wife's family. But that, you have a story about the Satterleys and the Tay. So when the ship wrecked, the Satterley family are the ones that came down and rescued the crew. Eleanor was the daughter. She was only 11 at the time. So it's Louisa and Herbert, that was mom and dad, who used material from the Tay and the sign that said the Tay and made this little boathouse.
Cool. So hopefully the hockey puck caught that conversation. To go back, pro tip for aspiring professors, marry money. Not the point of the talk, but good idea.
Hire Fred Savage.
Well, hiring Fred Savage might be a little harder than finding a rich spouse. Yep. All right. So here's Lisa.
Thank you very much for coming. But we have a wealth of information on our website. We have all of our, we have our digital history tour you can access on our website. We have 26 back issues of our history journal, Chabaco, which is just filled with information and stories. So and they're all free. I have a couple of copies back there if you're not familiar with it. It's citizen history, it's professors, it's really, really interesting stuff. So I highly recommend you go check those back issues out. We have 75 episodes of our Chabaco Chats program and 39 recordings of our public programs like these in our archive. It's just a wealth of information, really interesting stories and guests on those. And again, we have 30,000 items in our archives, and you can research them through the History Trust on our website as well, or you can call us and make an appointment with Patrick or Jen, and you can actually get into our collection and do some research and see some of the items that we have. So thank you very, very much.